So, once you've done some diagnosis with the organization or with the culture and decided, where we require to be, where we need to be in order to be successful, is what we really need is an interdependent collaborative culture. But what we've actually got is we've got more of an independent achiever culture or more of a dependent conformer culture, and you've established there is a gap and we need to develop, we need to move the culture upwards. You've sort of got the impetus, the movement, and even the business case to make that move. So the big question then becomes for everybody, how do you develop a culture? How do you move it? So that's what I want to talk about in this video. And essentially there are two different approaches you can take, and they both work. The first is called a top-down approach. And this is the idea that what you really need to move, first of all, is the most senior leadership group. Because once they transform the culture, the way they operate with each other, it will cascade out to others in the organization. And this is an idea which comes from John McGuire and Gary Rhodes. They wrote a book about this called Transforming Your Leadership Culture. And one of the big principles in there is you need to create headroom in the organization. And it's a very interesting idea. The idea is that the senior leadership team will, their own thinking and behaviors and practices creates the ceiling for the organization. They can talk about how they want everyone to behave and it can be collaborative, but within them, if their own behavior and thinking is more at, say, an independent achiever level, they're very much around their own silos, their own functions, their own teams, then what ends up happening is it's very hard for others in the organization to think and act beyond that level, beyond that ceiling that they've created. And so what we'll often see is when you've got people who naturally think from a higher stage of development, but the senior leadership team sort of keeps crushing them down with their decisions, these people, they just end up leaving the organization. They just get so frustrated with the way things are done around here, the types of decisions, maybe the lack of transparency, that they just leave the organization. So if you're noticing high performers or high potential people, great thinkers leaving the organization, one thing you want to check is what's our center of gravity within this organization? Are they leaving because they're frustrated with the way we do things around here? Now, so once you sort of establish where this leadership team is at, the idea is that they need to go through this cultural transformation first, and once they've really embodied the new culture, they've really experienced it, they've seen themselves shift individually and collectively in the way they think and the way they act together, then they will cascade that out into the organization. They will take it to the middle, and it's about leaders developing leaders. So how this typically happens is we'll work with a senior leadership team over the course of about 12 months and ongoing. But it starts off with them establishing for themselves how do they currently operate in terms of their thinking and in terms of their practices together. Do they operate collaboratively as a group? Is there appropriate group decision making? Or is it more around the CEO who sits there and tells people what to do and everyone looks after their own little fiefdoms? And so we'll get them to identify where they currently are, and also if they say that they need to be interdependent as a culture, we'll get them to identify what would it look like for this actual team if we were behaving much more collaboratively, much more interdependently. We'll get them to identify that and do a gap analysis between how are they currently doing things, how do they need to be. We'll get them to look at very specific things like decision making. How do they make their decisions? How much transparency is there within the team? Do they openly share all information which is relevant to other people? How much differentiation and authority is there within the team? Do they act and speak as one when they go out into the organization, or do they say one thing within the organization and within the team, then they walk out the door and tell others, I don't really agree with that decision? Now, and so the idea is that they will need to move through those stages themselves. Once they've done that, that's when others will start to notice it. So we're working with a group at the moment where others are really starting to notice that this team is operating differently. They're making collective decisions for the organization rather than very selfish ones. So I've seen other teams where they say we need to be one organization, but really they're not transparent with each other. They withhold information because they fear that if they were to share this information, others would use it against them. All right. So, and this is the top-down approach. Influence the leader, the senior leaders first, then cascade it to the middle. The middle out approach is a very interesting one, and I got a lot of this from a colleague of mine, Phil Wilburn, who's an expert on organizational network analysis. And the idea is that sometimes you don't get the chance to work with the top group, but you need to influence the culture. And so the most effective way to do that is to find out who are the super influencers within the organization who already have the mindset, the culture, the values that you have, that you want to see, plus they're well respected and influential amongst their peers. And so I'll tell you through an example. Bell Canada noticed that they had low morale at the front lines of the organization, and they realized they needed to increase morale and change the culture which was in the organization. Originally, they were looking at a sort of senior leaders group who was going to lead some task force, but then they decided, no, it's the front lines and the senior leaders, they're too far away and this needs to happen quickly. So what they did is they used their HR data and they did some organizational network analysis, and they identified who were the super influencers and the master motivators, they called them. And originally they brought together 9 of these people, and they explained that, you know, we need to boost morale and we need you guys to be part of that process. And so what happened was these people, they brought them together, they got them together, and then asked them, how do you think we could spread morale and particularly increase the new values we want within the organization? And these people came up with a whole lot of different ideas. They were very excited because they wanted to see this spread in the first place, and this was their opportunity. So they started setting up mentoring programs. They set up workshops. People listened to them because they were already informally influential. And plus they were doing it as a group, so they felt like something was really happening. There was a nucleus of them. This worked so successfully that they then brought in more of these super influencers, and they got up to over 150 of these people coming together to work out how do they spread this new culture. And they had a significant change in their culture and a significant change in their business results, actually. So those are the two approaches. Now, if I'm honest, my belief is they both work, and the most effective way to do it is to do both at the same time. The key question for you is, though, where do you have the most leverage and where can you start?